Space Arena.
Ground Arena. Saga Podcast.
And welcome back to the Space Arena, Ground Arena Saga Podcast, where we cover Star Wars Unlimited from the ground up into space. I am one of your hosts, MrBen, and today I can't face the dangers of the galaxy alone. I'm joined by BananaCrapshoot.
Hello. Happy to be here. Glad to be recording again. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about, so excited for this one. I hope everybody else is too.
So before we jump into a bunch more cards and starter decks and all this fun stuff that we have to talk about, what have you been playing over the last couple of weeks since we saw each other?
So, I've been playing some Star Wars Unlimited on Felt Table, which is an in-browser build decks and play against AI. So that's been pretty cool. Shout out to the community members that threw that together. And then other than that, I've been playing mainly DC Dual Force. That game still really I enjoy. So that's Star Wars Unlimited and DC Dual Force for me. How about you?
So around the house, Whitman, my son, was listening to a podcast that some animation channel he's into, and they talked about playing this board game Santorini, which I had never played before, but I found a copy of it used at my game store, and it has taken over our table. It was like when I first introduced the kids to the Crew or to Zombicide. It's like, this is the game that we're going to play. So we've been playing a lot of Santorini, and then it was last Saturday. My game store, about once a month, when they close on a Saturday, they keep the store open for like the VIPs, and we get to bring in some adult beverages and like get a little rowdy. And I was supposed to play this game called Cosmoctopus. I guess it's a space octopus game. I don't know, but I ended up teaching 3 people how to play Arkham Horror instead, which is always a great time.
There you go. Also, kind of like Horror Octopus, right? So,
yeah. I watched other people play the Space Octopus game, like at an adjacent table. So I don't even know how it happened. I was just kind of standing there waiting for a game, and they're like, "Hey, teach us Arkham Horror." Okay, I guess.
do we have enough time for this?
So, unless we have further things to talk about with regard to our week, I think we can dive right into some new cards.
Yeah, I mean, I got nothing else other than, coaching football. That's it.
All right. Well, let's see if I go into slideshow. There we go. So we'll go ahead and dive. Actually, you know what? Now that you say that, it was 106 degrees here today. And you got kids out doing football?
Really? Well,
Hopefully
it wasn't 106 degrees here.
You're at as it is here. Okay, good. I think
the high today was in the low 80s.
The other, and then I went, oh my goodness. Okay, so we'll dive into some cards instead of me being concerned about football players.
Do you want me to start with these? Or
sure.
Do you want to start?
I mean, yeah,
so
if you
first up,
pitch,
we
go
have...
for it, man.
Cool. All right, so the first one we have is a space unit. It's a 3-cost aggression aspect. 4 power, 1 health, vehicle fighter trait with the ability, when defeated, if you have the initiative, draw 2 cards. I think it's a cool, fast aggression card. I think it really rewards good sequencing. I mean, I don't think it's the greatest card ever, but I think it's okay. Also, card art that, pretty sure this space unit is originated in like an old computer game, like Star Wars TIE Fighter, I believe.
Oh, that's cool.
What are your thoughts on this one?
I don't think you ever want to be in the position where you are trying to claim the initiative after playing this card. I think this is a card that you want to have set yourself up to get the value out of this the turn previous. So you want to claim, then a subsequent turn, you play this thing out, hope your opponent has to deal with it or is incentivized to deal with it. It feels a little awkward because if you play this out and you don't have the initiative, it kind of makes your opponent want to claim it out from underneath you so that way they can deal with this unit first thing on their next turn. It feels a little awkward to me. I guess the payoff is there, and I will say if you're on an aggressive deck, and this is the aggressive faction, you definitely are going to need cards that let you fill your gas tank again. Famously, like in basically every card game ever, aggressive decks tend to run out of things to do towards the mid to late game. So this fits into that, but I'm just not totally sure how easily navigable the making sure you have the initiative when you need it to get full value out of this card is going to be.
Yeah, I think you, like in fast decks that don't have a lot of actions or whatever built into them that are gonna, if you know you're gonna be claiming before your opponent, I think this is an okay include. But then also, like, it's just gonna, like, it's not gonna stick around, so you're basically playing it to defeat it, right? So I guess you would use it to sacrifice it to run and do another unit, and then try to get the 2 cards out of it. So it's not that great, but it could be, I think, impactful in the right deck in the right situation. But yeah.
And if you don't get the 2 cards,
All right. So next up we have
4/1 doesn't feel great.
Security Complex was a vigilance base. All right. So next up we have a Security Complex, which is a vigilance base. It has 25 health and it has an epic action. Give a shield to a non-leader unit. What do you think of this one?
Okay. I think it was on this show where I said I was sure we were going to see bases that had some kind of something to do. I said, if not in this set, definitely set 2. I was sure we were going to explore this territory. I was excited to explore this territory. And wow, this one does not impress me. So you're paying 5 life off your base. You're getting yourself 5 life closer to losing the game to give a shield token to a single unit. It has to be a non-leader, and you get to do that 1 time. So that shield is going to have to absorb at least 5 damage in order to make this exchange worth it. And your opponent is going to have a ton to say about whether or not it actually does absorb 5 damage. I will grant that if you sequence this correctly and if you time it right, having the ability to just totally bounce all of your opponent's attack damage while still getting you essentially create a value trade out of this, that can sometimes be good. But the idea that at the beginning of the game, I have to pay 5 life for an effect that I may or may not have an opportune moment to use. I love that this design space exists, but this card ain't it, at least for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'm more excited about what this card means than what this card does. Like you said, the design space for giving abilities to bases, we kind of have an idea of maybe where they're going to go, like in the future. Like we have an idea that we're paying health for the ability, But yeah, I think it's super nichey. I don't know that I can think of with. I mean, we only have like 25% of the card pool available to us in card reviews, but of what we've seen, I don't know that there's a deck I would build that I would pay the 5 health for a shield.
I mean, to think about it in another way, if this was an event card that said pay 5 life, put a shield on a non-leader unit, I don't think anybody's putting that in their deck. Now, that's a little bit of an unfair comparison because this base won't take up a slot in your deck, and this hypothetical card, so you're actually paying a little more for it than just the 5 life plus the to get the shield. But I mean, that's a bad card. So I don't know that it being on a base makes it that much better. I guess as long as saboteur isn't like a real common keyword, maybe there's a little bit, like, I'm trying to be charitable to this overall. No, it doesn't work for me.
I mean, I think there is something to say though that like this is like an in your pocket at any point you can give something a shield. So there is something to that. Like Luke can give things shields, but it's very dependent on situations, right? You have to play heroism unit on his front side, and on his deployed side, you have to attack with him to get the shield. So, I don't know, maybe like a Krennic deck where you want to have some dudes that have some damage on them, but you want them to stick around to get that extra power. Maybe, you get them planked and then give them the shield so they can stick around for another round with extra power. Maybe that's worth it. I mean, I think it could probably
Maybe.
have its uses, but I kind of want to see what the other ones look like now, Like
I think you actually stumbled on something valuable there. I was thinking of this from the perspective of that shield has to absorb at least 5 damage, or else this exchange wasn't worth it. But with your example of the Krennic deck and wanting to keep damaged dudes around, that's where this might work. If you're getting some extra synergy in a vacuum, I think this is a bad base. But if you have some synergy in your deck that is going to give you a benefit that is more than the sum of its parts, so to speak, that could potentially be where this card could find a spot. But that might not exist for a set or two or three. Overall,
Yeah,
I'm pretty unimpressed with this base.
I like the artwork on it. It's cool. We got some Rogue One stuff, right? So,
Yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah.
and it's rare. So I just wanted to point out it's rare. Uh, the rarity on it.
All right, so we'll move on to Boba Fett. I guess I kind of set you up here because I was going to take this page, but I imagine you wanna talk about Boba Fett, huh?
You go first.
Okay, so this is a 5 cost cunning villainy affiliated leader. He is a 4/7, and when this unit completes an attack, if an enemy unit left play this phase, ready up to 2 resources. His undeployed side is cunning villainy, and when an enemy unit leaves play, you may exhaust this leader. If you do, ready a resource. Epic action is accessible to you at 5 resources. So his deployed version gives you basically twice the upside to his undeployed version, but he can come out relatively early, and essentially both sides are rewarding you for doing something that you kind of want to do anyway, without asking you to have to like pay or invest in it. What do you think of this card?
I love it. So I love this Boba Fett card. I don't know. I just like it. I like that it comes out on 5, comes out pretty early. It seems more aggressive of a leader than other ones we've seen. He has the same stats as Luke, but comes out around earlier. Um, I just want to note that on his deployed side, when it says when this unit completes an attack, he has to survive that attack to get that effect. Um, yeah, and the front side, like you could waylay a unit, and that counts, right? So the same thing on his deployed side. As long as an enemy unit left play, and you attack with Boba Fett and he survives, you can ready 2 resources. Now, so I will say, like, I don't think in a game where we have the action economy we do in Star Wars Unlimited that this could be so, like, this would be broken almost, I think, if it was like Hearthstone or like Magic or a game like that where you could, like, hey, I'm going to complete an attack and then I get 2 mana gems back, like that could be like to lead to some crazy things. I think in the action economy of it, I think it's going to be a higher skill cap leader than other ones we've seen, because the way you have to sequence things with your actions to get the most out of his effect, I think is going to take more skill to get right than other leaders we've seen.
It's probably also worth pointing out that you're going to need something to do with those resources. So you're either going to have threats that you develop to the board already. You're going to have cards in your hand that you can play. I would think that a lot of times decks that want to play a little aggressively are going to want to claim. You're going to get out there, do your things quick, claim the initiative, and be able to go first next turn. If this guy is trying to remove units, ready resources, play some more stuff. In my head, I think of Boba Fett as like an aggressive guy, but this is a cunning Boba Fett. And I think you're right that this is going to be a skill testing card, because you don't only have the action economy, you have the card economy that you have to manage at the same time. And I could see this, you end up in a situation where You can't get the units removed when you want them to, so you're not getting the extra resources when you need to spend it, and your hands getting clogged. I could see this being a difficult card if somebody doesn't put in the reps to really understand when the moments to go and when the moments to hold back your resources are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think also, so like, if you build a lower curve deck, right, like if the top of your curve is only 5, and then after turn 5, you're keeping both cards you draw every turn, you might be able to get more out of it that way than if you're going for bigger things. Yeah, just something to think about. If your curve is lower and then you get to that point in the game where you're going to accumulate a card advantage faster than your opponent, right? Like if you're playing against Vader, who's going to build to 7 resources so he can deploy, and 2 turns earlier, you're starting to build that card advantage. I think that might lead to you being able to get more out of him.
He has the same stat block as the Luke Skywalker leader, doesn't he? 4/7?
Yep.
And he comes out 1 turn earlier?
Yeah.
And 2 turns earlier. Yeah. That feels like pretty strong stats for coming out potentially as early as turn 5. And it would make that a turn 5 where you could play 7 resources worth of stuff. That all feels pretty spicy to me. I'm excited for this guy.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to more cunning cards to see like what we could do with him.
I also like the art. Classic moment.
And it matches the his subtitle of collecting the bounty. And then, the Han Solo and Carbonite's being loaded onto his fire spray. So
I actually really love that Han has like a tiny little embarrassing cameo in the background of this shot. Like it's so good. Really, there's nothing about this card I don't like.
It's good. I'm excited to see what we can do with him.
Okay, I think we've probably talked through that one, and we will move on. You want to take this page?
Sure. So first up, we have 2-cost Vigilance upgrade Entrenched. I dig the artwork on this one for all the people listening on iTunes and Spotify. It has the solo art that reminds me of like when Han's an Imperial trooper and he's fighting in a war right before he meets Chewbacca. It reads attached unit cannot attack bases, and it's a condition that gives +3 power and +3 health. What are your thoughts on this one?
It's a little hard to get behind an upgrade that makes it so you can't use that unit to push for a win condition. That drawback is significant. That said, you're getting 6 composite stats for 2 cost, which is pretty good. And it doesn't say, even though it's called Entrenched, it doesn't say that this has to target ground units. So putting a +3/+3 onto a space unit sounds kind of juicy, but you've got dominant control of outer space, and then what? You can't use that unit to, I guess if you have other space units behind it that could kind of push the damage while your big chonky boy controls the air. Putting this on a sentinel feels pretty good, somebody that you might not want to be necessarily attacking aggressively with anyway, but that drawback scares me, man. I could see that you get this unit out and your opponent just doesn't even have to deal with it because it's never a threat to push for game. So hard for me. I'm leaning towards not being totally thrilled with this card, but a deck that needs some big chonky sentinel unit, this is going to make your sentinel much bigger.
I actually think the best play with this is playing this on your opponent's units, right? Because then you're locking them out from attacking, right?
Okay, I acknowledge I had a blind spot there. I didn't even think about playing this on your opponent's units. That's awesome. Okay, now I'm on board with this card because the flexibility of using this to screw your opponent's plan or as a beat stick to gain control of the board. Okay, now, all right, you've totally won me over. I like this card now.
And we do know you can play upgrades on your opponent's cards because there was on a stream they talked about, I think it was when they were talking about the uniqueness rule, they had said about like if you're playing like a Vader mirror, you could play like a Vader saber on your opponent's Vader, but then you can trigger, because you own the card, you get the when played effect to deal the 4 damage. So like they said you could play an upgrade on opponent's cards, so you can target opponent's units with this. So like imagine playing like somebody that just dropped a Palpatine that has like 6/6 with Overwhelm. right? So like any unit is gonna like die to Palpatine, right? But you can keep him from going straight to base at least. Maybe that's a bad example because 9 at power with overwhelm is gonna hit base anyway because of the overwhelm. So that's probably a bad example. But attaching this to a Vader or a Luke, Vader with the saber, and then you give him this, and he can't swing at your base for 10. But if you do that, I mean, nothing in your arena is going to survive, though. So it's you can play it to lock them out, but then you're like nothing's going to live in that arena for you. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think is like a desperate ploy to try to squeak out a win. Playing this to lock out your opponent for going for their win condition could be sneaky, but
I will say, in a sealed environment, this is probably good. Just having some unit that you can invest into, it's already ready. You drop this on it, you can use it to clean something up. Your opponent kind of eventually has to deal with it, or you're going to keep taking over the board. In constructed, I'm guessing there's probably going to be better options. But in sealed, +3/+3 permanent for 2. Again, that drawback is so scary to me. But the flexibility of being able to hose your opponent makes me think I want to like this card.
yeah. I mean, other than locking down your opponent, I think probably Sentinel units is probably the play.
And really, using it to hose your opponent is probably like for the memes. I bet that doesn't happen most of the time. Like,
I'm only going to use it.
well, there you go. Okay.
And then if we're good with that, I'll move on to the next one. The Blizzard Assault AT-AT. Do not call it an AT-AT. That will drive me insane. It is an AT-AT. So it is a ground unit, 8 cost. It has command and villainy aspects, 9 power, 9 health, Imperial Vehicle Walker, with the text, when this unit attacks and defeats a unit, you may deal the excess damage from this attack to an enemy ground unit. So it kind of works like Overwhelm, but instead of going to base, it goes to another ground unit. I think this card's pretty sweet. What do you think?
I wish that was a keyword, because I think it's really cool. I think that's a cool power. And having it not be a keyword means I don't think we're going to see it very often. This card also, I think, has the biggest stats we've seen on anything so far, right? 9/9?
The Relentless, that Star Destroyer was a 9/9, but it's the same stats as that
so tied for the biggest stats.
But it's 1 cheaper, so that goes. They said that ground units are a little more efficient, so.
I mean, that's a big number, especially if you're using that base we looked at earlier and you're starting the game with 25 health. This thing could take a big chunk off of it. And I like that it lets you. Now, it does kind of lock you in, it not as effectively as Entrenched locks you in to not being able to attack bases. The Blizzard Assault AT-AT incentivizes you to not send that big 9 damage into a base. You want to kill a unit and then use that damage to kill another unit. So it's in kind of a weird place in that it's like a board control card that's going to be a curve topper. A lot of times at the top of my curve, we're looking at end game. That's when I want to be going base. That's when I want to be killing things, or killing the opponent rather. But I think the kind of cool thing that this 8-drop does, while it's not as proactive as I usually like in a top-end card, you could play this and swing for a pretty substantial amount of damage to burst for that win, or you could play this and control the board. So it's a top-end card in your deck that, again, not as proactive as I would like, but it gives you the flexibility to deal with 2 different types of situations. Can you push for the win, or do you have to clean up the board before you can push for the win? And in that case, I'm thinking this is probably playable.
Yeah, I think it seems pretty decent. I mean, I like the flexibility that offers based on everything that like you just talked about. The ability, I mean, you're still hitting the base for 9, right? The thing you're losing is the splash damage, really, right? So you're able to hit 2 things if you defeat something. If you don't defeat something, it's just 9 damage. Just 9 damage, right? So I think it's going to be good regardless. I think it's going to be awesome in sealed and draft. Pulling this boss monster out and then You know, just I think you play this and you just lock down the ground arena basically, right? So I think this clears the path for you on that side to really do some damage to base with your other things. If you can give this thing Sentinel somehow, or you know, like so they have to swing into it. Now you don't get the ability off of that when it's attacked, but you got to hit a 9/9 with something. I think pretty wild.
You probably hit the nail on the head that this is going to really shine in limited environments. Generally, in sealed and draft, everybody's decks are a little bit more janky. We're a little bit less lethal because our decks are a little bit janky. So things are going to go later, and these kind of like curved toppers that maybe aren't like high enough tier to really excel in a constructed environment. This thing offers some really good board control options, and 9 damage, that's almost a third of the opposing player's total health pool. So yeah, I think this beat stick is probably going to see some play.
I agree.
Okay, so we'll move on to I think everybody predicted that Luke's lightsaber was going to show up. If we got Vader's, we have to get Luke's, and here it is. Finally, get to see what it does. So this is a 2-cost upgrade that is Vigilance and Heroism affiliated. It gives +3/+1 to the units it is attached to, and the text on the card prevents you from attaching it to a vehicle. It has to go on a non-vehicle unit, and when played, if attached unit is Luke Skywalker, heal all damage from him and give a shield token to him. So much like Vader's lightsaber, it's way better if you play it on the person it's supposed to be played on. But in a pinch, if you need to give +3/+1 to a unit, it's not a card that's just rotting in your hand if you don't control Luke. What are your thoughts on this one?
I think this is great for Luke. I don't see how anybody could not like this card, really. Healing all damage from Luke is pretty wild. Like, it just doesn't give him a shield. It heals all damage from him first. So, and it, like, you play this on Luke and it makes him a 7/8. So, I mean, in the games I've been playing on Felt Table, like, if you can deploy Vader the same turn like Luke deploys, like, Luke just dies. But if he has a saber, I think it makes him more competitive into that mid to late game Vader matchup.
I'm not sure if it is worth playing without a Luke Skywalker leader that you know you're going to see. Now, I know the 8 Vader meme that, yes, eventually we're going to have probably a version of Luke at every single drop in the curve. That's on a long enough timeline, that's almost inevitable. But early in the game, I'm not sure if you're going to put this in your deck for unit versions of Luke that are also in your deck that you may or may not draw. So this card might see somewhat limited play outside of Luke Skywalker leader decks early, but the deeper into the life cycle of Star Wars Unlimited that we get, I think it's only going to get better, much like Vader's lightsaber. It's just the more versions of the character exist, the better this piece of equipment is going to look. And frankly, healing everything off of a unit and giving them a shield plus the attack, it's ridiculous. This seems way too good for only 2 costs.
There's a lot of good flavor there, though, and I mean, if the unit disappears, it disappears, right? So it's not like, I wonder. So this is a little sidebar, but in Star Wars Destiny, there was a keyword called redeploy. So if you had an upgrade, like a weapon attached to a unit and or a character and it had redeploy, if that character was defeated, you could attach it to another character you had into play. I'm curious if just in the design space of upgrades, if we would see something like that in this game.
I mean, eventually, that's cool design space. It doesn't feel like a set 1 mechanic, but
No, but
it's a cool mechanic.
yeah.
Although in this case, if you redeploy it, it has to become Rey's lightsaber, right?
Yeah, it becomes Rey's lightsaber here. Or Maz's. It goes into Maz's trunk.
Yeah. Sorry, I screwed up the chain of custody there.
Yeah, because in about 2 seconds, he's about to get that thing dismembered. So,
yeah.
it does not end well for Bespin Luke. So,
any other thoughts on the lightsaber?
I think it's good. 2 cost, 3 power, 1 health. I think it's good.
Yeah, you compare it to that other 2 cost upgrade we just looked at that gives +3/+3. Yeah, healing all damage is definitely better than an extra +2 health value.
Plus, it gives the shields, right? So it has it has the epic action of the base effect. It has the power, and it has healing, and it makes Luke a beat stick instead of a whiny farm boy. So
Man, that card does a lot. It really does.
yeah, it's good.
Okay, moving on to Resupply. This is a command affiliated 3-cost event. You pay your 3, and then you put this event into play as a resource. It doesn't specify on the card, but generally speaking, when resources interplay, they interplay ready, don't they?
No, the interplay exhausted.
No, it interplay exhausted like units. Okay. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I guess you put them in play and then they ready at the end of that
And then they
phase.
ready
So,
during the regroup phase. Yeah, it's just like the DJ Kyber, the laser technician, that specifies to put it in a play ready. Unless
okay.
unless it specifies to put it in a play ready, it enters play exhausted.
So unless there's some kind of end of game, I have to race to this win condition combo. I think this card's too slow. Maybe there's a specific deck that has to get to 8 resources by turn 4 and or something, and maybe in that deck you play this, but just in a vacuum and sealed in draft, I think this card is way too slow. For 3 costs. You get to go up 1 resource. I don't know. That's, I guess, thinking about the fact that turn 3 or 3 resources is actually only turn 2 in this game. That does make it a little bit faster. It feels really slow to me. And unless we see big, super impactful end game payoff cards that are make it worth taking this kind of a tempo hit early in the game, because you spend your 3 resources on this, and I spend my 3 resources on some spaceships and some dudes that start smashing your face. I don't know that this investment's going to pay off before it's GG. What are your thoughts?
I think if you are building like a specific ramp deck, that this will be good to get you to your win condition faster. So I was messing around on Felt Table and had 3 DJ Kybers and 3 resupplies. And I got Vader out on turn 5. So a turn before Luke could enter play. Like, I got him out. I guess it would be turn 4, which was a turn earlier than Luke could enter play. And it was pretty disgusting to have like a turn 4 Vader, because I played like a DJ Kyber that I pinged with my own Vader ability, and then played a resupply, and then could deploy Vader. Because, so like if you play resupply when you have 4 resources and it enters play exhausted, or okay, so let me get to, if I have 6 resources and play resupply that uses 3 of them to get to my 7 resources, even though it's exhausted, I can still use my Vader epic action, because it doesn't matter if the resources are ready or not. So I think if you're trying to cheat out like your leader, if it's an impactful leader, it could be worth it. I think if you're playing a deck that you really want to hit your top end really fast, like if all your stuff is Blizzard Assault, AT-ATs, and Gladiator Star Destroyers and crap, like you're playing all the big expensive stuff, you want to get there as fast as possible. I think you sacrifice the early tempo for the late game superiority and get there faster. So I can
And
see
hope
it
you don't
being
get
play.
run over by aggro.
Yeah.
It probably falls victim to any general criticism of any ramp deck in any card game ever. Like, what you're doing is you're taking a hit now, you're investing in being able to be stronger on future turns, and hoping that that's going to pay off. And generally speaking, there's ramp decks are not usually the most common archetype. I'm trying to be diplomatic in how I talk about these. It's usually a couple of very specific builds that are going to benefit from this type of thing, and usually they're pretty fragile. Because if you don't get the stuff you need, you've got a whole handful of fatties that just rot there because you can't play them because you didn't hit your ramp cards. So yeah, situational. I will concede that in certain situations, if you build around it, you can probably get some use out of this card. But generally speaking, 3 for being up 1 next turn feels very sluggish to me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're like you said, you're sacrificing tempo, you're sacrificing board presence, you're sacrificing lots of things. But let me ask you this: if this was a card, if this was a plot twist in Versus System 2 PCG that said build, pay 3 recruit points, put this into play as a like put this in your row, and you're playing a Dark Phoenix deck, right? Would you play this card?
In Dark Phoenix, probably, because that's a card that cares a lot about how many resources you have. I guess there's sort of a corollary there that in Star Wars Unlimited, all of the leaders, all of the main characters kind of care how many resources you have. It's not exactly the same. So, from the perspective of this card saying, like, pay 3, give your leader 1 XP so it can come out a turn earlier, that certainly makes it look a little better than some other generic ramp cards in other games. But I mean, if we go back one episode when I was talking about DJ turntables, that card I was all about.
Right.
And that lets you get some ramp. Plus, it's attached to a body that can maybe do something first.
Right.
This it's either too expensive, or it's not enough value, or it's like I would like to see this be like maybe a 2-cost card, and I probably wouldn't be so harsh on it. I'm not saying ramp as a concept is bad. I'm just not sure that the way this is implemented is going to make the cut in a constructed 60, unless it's a very specific kind of deck.
That's fair. I just, you are the Build Phase podcast for Versus Systems, so I just thought I'd throw that out there to you to, get that analogy.
Well, if we look at kind of a similar card from Versus, you've got like Mantis, but that's
like
even
DJ.
a
DJ.
fair comparison to the DJ. Yeah, because it's get a unit, and then when the unit dies, it turns into a resource.
Mm-hmm.
This is skipping the unit part, and I think that's the critical difference that keeps me from being like really excited and thinking the card's going to be powerful to being pretty lukewarm on it.
That's fair.
I guess I should say that is all predicated on the assumption that Star Wars Unlimited as a game is going to be really board focused and having stuff on the board that can affect your opponent's board, and controlling of the 2 arenas is going to be kind of a core part of the experience. I think that's a fair assumption to make, but
yeah, I would say so.
Those assumptions are the basis of me kind of not being super high on this card, because I don't think it does enough with regard to immediately affecting the board state.
That's fair.
All right. I guess we will move on, and I think it's your turn if you want to take over this page.
Sure do. All right, we got first one's a 5-cost event, Overwhelming Barrage, which is a tactic. It's command and villainy aspects. The text is give a friendly unit +2 power, +2 health for this phase, then it deals damage equal to its power, divided as you choose among any number of other units. And it has some killer artwork. What are your thoughts on this one?
I guess this makes that kind of lame 4/1 ship we looked at earlier look a little better. So the setup turn has got to be turn 4. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be turn 4, but if we're looking at playing this card on curve, your setup turn is turn 4. You're going to want to try to get a unit into play. Does it specify non-leader? No, just a friendly unit. So you could pop your leader and then have 6 burst, for example, if Luke was your leader. This is going to be, I think this is probably a little too fragile to be that. I don't know. So buffing a unit and getting to also kill a thing equal to that unit's power is really good. Like, just in a vacuum, those 2 things being packaged together into one card feels very strong to me. Now, how much work do you have to do to set that up? What do your 4-drops need to look like in your deck? Or are you going to have attack slanted like 2s and 3s so you can guarantee there's something on board so that you can play it? Because I don't think you want to play this on a unit that you're not also going to attack with. So that +2/+2, the +2 attack should actually look like almost like +4 in terms of composite stats, because you're going to get the +2 on the unit, attack with that, but then you're also going to use that +2 plus whatever the unit's attack value is to go kill another thing, and it lets it divide it any way you choose. So you could pop off and kill a few things. So this could be a great anti-swarm card. This could take out one really tall thing, but it all requires you to stick a unit to the board that has a relevant attack value. I want to say this card is good, but I think it's probably going to be good, but I can see how the setup condition might be fragile enough that if your opponent's hip to it and they know what you're going for and they gun down all of your like attack slanted units on your setup turn, it could end up, you might just never have the board conditions to really get like great value out of it. But +2/+2, it's hard to turn your nose up at that packaged into also a damage spell. I think I'm thumbs up on this one.
I'm definitely thumbs up on this one, and I'll tell you, you have 7 resources. You drop your lightsaber on Vader, and then your next action you play Overwhelming Barrage. Okay, and then you have a 10 power to smoke the board with, and then you can attack base with 10 power. And if you happen to have Monty on board, you can, deal the 2 damage to him to ready him and attack again. So you can get a 20 damage Vader plus 30 power worth of damage in one turn.
And that's not even that crazy, because you're
that's
talking
2 cards.
about 3. Yeah, and the third card, the Vader, you don't even have to draw it out of your deck. It starts in play. Like, yeah, that's pretty good, man. Now, it's not always going to look like that, obviously.
No, but I mean, it's there.
It looks really good.
Yeah, and that's just the first one I could think of, right? I mean, imagine, like if you did this to Boba Fett, right? If you played, like, Command Cunning Boba Fett, and you make him a 6/9, blow stuff up for 6, and then attack with him, then you get to ready 2 resources on his unit side, and you can play some other stuff. Like, that seems pretty good. So, I think this card is going to end up being very good. Yeah, I just hope it's not too good, because just with 25% of the card pool, we just figured out a 30 damage combo, right? So, hopefully I think it's pretty good, though.
Well, things like shields are going to be relevant.
Yeah.
The biggest fragility point on the card was setting it up. But the fact that it can hit your leader,
right,
and there's almost nothing your opponent can do to prevent you from getting your leader out, it does make it seem like this is going to be more consistent and more durable than when I was originally kind of looking through all these the other day or earlier today, kind of formulating my thoughts. I really was focused on recruitable units with this guy, but man,
I think the leader is the play here.
Other than shields, like what can you do to prevent this? For it, like if they're going to target their leader with it, you just have to be like shielded up and hope you can withstand the barrage, I guess.
Shields, yeah, because I mean, even if there's a Sentinel unit, right? Like that's Sentinel is just attack damage, attack power. That's not like that's targeting attack power, not events. So events, yeah, shields. So the thing about shields, so when there's stuff like this, like all damage is assigned and dealt simultaneously, right? So you assign the damage, and it's all going to hit at once. So you can't like, I'm going to deal 1 here and get rid of the shield, and then I'm going to deal another one. No, that's not how it works. So if you have 8 power, you're dividing.
That would be stupid.
You divide it all at once, right? You assign it, and it's dealt all at once. You can't try to cheat the shield. But yeah, other than shields, that's about it. And I think we will see the most mileage out of this out of leaders. But I think there's probably, if we get more like Vader and Boba Fett are the 2 villainy leaders, right? And they're both kind of proactive. When they deploy, they have bigger stats. But if there's a leader that we want to see, like a ramp leader that kind of sits back and is more, we'll say passive, that if you get to that Blizzard AT-AT, and then you play this on it, and now it's an 11/11 for that phase, right? Like, stuff like that could be cool. Like, I see where this could be. You're going to play this on big units at some point, but I think the leader is the sure play because you always are going to have access to it. when you want to have access to it. So
Yeah, it's a combat trick and a board wipe and a hard removal kind of all in one. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get all three of those together. It's like actually a combat trick plus and or
yeah,
one of those other two, but still feels like it could be pretty good.
yeah, definitely. So we'll move on to the next one. The Gladiator Star Destroyer. It is a 6-cost space unit, also commanded villainy. It has 5 power, 6 health. It's an Imperial vehicle capital ship. The game text, when played, give a unit Sentinel for this phase. So it doesn't specify what unit, doesn't specify what arena. Just you play it and you give something Sentinel. So, what are your thoughts on this one?
Uh, it's a little hard for me to envision having a deck that I would splash a 6-cost card into for a single phase worth of Sentinel. So I think we have to look at the text on the card as gravy. And the question really is, do you want to pay 6 for a 5/6 space unit? Um, that's probably fair. This is probably a decent thing to throw up there into the space arena. I will acknowledge there's certainly going to be times where giving a unit Sentinel is going to break up your opponent's attack sequencing. It's going to screw their turn up. But just for the phase, like you can't call a 6-cost card like a tech card. So if you're going to play this, I think you probably want the card because of the unit, and the entering playability is gravy that sometimes is going to be helpful. What are your thoughts?
I'm kind of torn on this one. Because if it just, like, kind of like what you said, if it just gave a static Sentinel, like, oh, like if this unit, while this unit is in play, give another unit Sentinel, right? Like, then I could see this being really good because you're playing it to protect that. But just for the phase, like, I don't know that does enough. I guess the flexibility that it can go on any unit is better than if it's like give a unit in this arena Sentinel, because then you're locking it into just space units. Um, but I kind of want to see what other 6-drop options we have to compare it, because we have nothing really to compare it to at that cost in the space arena. So like this might be a really awesome 6-drop in a space arena where it might not be. So I'm not thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm kind of in the middle because I just don't have enough information really to say either way at this point.
I think the stats are going to be good for the space arena, but I'm not sure. And if the stats aren't good, then this card is not good. Like you have to play this because 5/6, a 6-cost 5/6 in space is good by itself, and sometimes you get the upside. And if 6-cost 5/6 in space is not good by itself, I don't see this. Maybe in draft or see like some kind of limited format where this is the only 6-drop you got. But in constructed, if that stat line doesn't end up being rock solid, I can't see this seeing play because the text on the card just isn't enough.
Yeah. I kind of feel like we're giving up 2 composite stats for that ability. It's just like my hunch.
I mean, I guess it's worth pointing out that like turn 6, turn 7, these are the turns when people are going to start throwing their leaders into play. So being able to have a surprise Sentinel that comes out
That's
that they weren't expecting, as well as maybe developing in the other, like there could, but I feel like I'm bending over backwards a little bit to be charitable.
yeah. I mean that. I guess the whole point, right? You want your leaders to be impactful. If you deploy your leader and it gets wiped out right away, that's gonna be like a feels bad. So I guess there is some value in the turn your dudes played to protect it somehow. So there's some value in that, I guess. But I feel like I need to see more cards at that cost to kind of say. Maybe I'm taking the cop out. I don't know. I'm not
Yeah,
crazy
no,
about it, but I
think
don't
that's
dislike it. So
I mean, if other 6-cost space units are giving us stats like 3-5, well, okay, then this looks pretty good by comparison, but I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
No, well, I mean, we've seen like the Imperial Interceptor is a 3-4 or a 3-2, but it deals 3 power, right? And the Azatuk unit, I think that one's like a 3-4. That's the heroism unit with ambush, and that's like a 4 cost. And the Relentless is a 9, and that's a 9/9. And then that has the ability where like the first event played is a dud. So
Yeah,
it's hard to say
until we see more 6-drops. It's just hard to say. Like,
yeah, I don't
I could see
dislike
a
it, but
world
my
where these are
gut says it's.
considered good stats.
I mean, I don't dislike the card, but my gut says it's not that great. So
Yeah, I'm trying to convince myself that these are decent stats in space, but as soon as I get information that proves that incorrect, then I think this thing goes. I don't even know if this goes in my binder. This probably goes underneath my drink, actually. That's too harsh. That
is harsh. Yeah.
Okay, so we will move on and we will look at a 2-cost aggression villainy affiliated ground unit, Admiral Ozzel. He is a 2/3 and he has an action: play an Imperial unit from your hand, paying its cost. It enters play ready. That all sounds awesome. And then there's one more line on the card: each opponent may ready a unit. What are your thoughts?
I think this card is going to enable a lot of cool things on the board. It's really interesting to me how this is worded, right? So like it's not a when played. So you play him and you want to protect him to get the most out of this. Because if you play him and he gets wiped, right, then you just wasted 2 resources in a card. So he has to live. Then you have to use his action. So if you're using his action, you're not attacking with him, but it's only 2 attacks, so what's it matter? It has to be an Imperial unit, so you're kind of locked in. I think this goes in a very specific deck, but the ability to play cards from hand and have them enter play ready, I think is good. And I think you definitely want to do this as like your first action of the turn. That way your opponent doesn't get to ready any units. Right, because if you can do something to give you value and take away your opponent's value out of it, that would be ideal. So I think this goes in a very specific deck where I think the potential and payoff is definitely there if you're playing some sort of Imperial Rush deck to get dudes in ready to hit the turn they interplay.
I feel like the action economy might be the crack in this card. Like the idea of being able to exhaust a dude to get another ready guy into play, like that feels like it should be good. But if you aren't able to sequence this as your first action, like maybe you don't have the initiative or whatever, if this isn't, you can't make this your first action, and your opponent does get to ready a guy, they actually get to use their guy before you get to use the guy that you cheated into play ready.
Mm-hmm.
That feels awful, which means how awkward is this guy going to be to use? I agree with you that the ability to cheat a unit into play ready feels really strong, but there's a bunch of like other things on this card that are being asked of you as a player that don't appear in the text, and among them are claiming the initiative as your first action this turn, exhaust this guy. As soon as you're giving your opponent the ability to ready a dude and attack you with that dude before you can even gain from that just all feels really, really bad. So I think this guy, he's going to have a home. There are going to be decks that want to use him. At a 2-cost 2/3, you could throw him in a deck, and even if you don't use his power, just the threat of it might feel kind of cool to have that hanging out there, making your opponent think about it. But this is going to be one of those, I guess skill testing is the nice way to put it. This is going to be one of those cards where if you just kind of willy-nilly try to use this guy, you are going to get stung. You're going to let your opponent ready something, and they're going to hit you with it, and you're going to feel dumb for letting it have happened if you're not careful in how you use this guy. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, I think you're gonna, if you fly too close to the sun with him, you're gonna get burned for sure.
Yeah, I wish it didn't have that last line. I don't want to let my opponents ready things.
Yeah.
Not at all. Okay, so let's move on to Rogue Operative. This is a 3-cost Cunning and Heroism affiliated ground unit. It has a 2/4 stat block, and it has the Saboteur keyword, which allows it to ignore Sentinel, and when it attacks somebody with shields, it takes all their shields off, and it has Raid 2, so it gets +2 attack while attacking. So this is a 3-cost 4/4 while you're swinging with it. What do you think of the Rogue Operative?
I really like a lot on what's going on with this card. I think this card's really, really good. It's a good cost. It has good keywords. I think it's just a solid ground unit we're going to see in every Cunning Heroism deck, at least in set 1. I don't know why you wouldn't play this if you're running those colors. There's a lot of really good stuff here.
Maybe not the most exciting card. This isn't a character that I think anybody's going to get excited about. Like Kennedy talks about the Twi'lek Smuggler all the time. This is that kind of card. It's not flashy. It's not eye-catching. It's not an iconic character, but this is an absolute workhorse. This is the kind of card that you snap. Oh, I guess it's a common, so maybe you don't have to snap pick it and draft. But this is the kind of card that if you're in Cunning and you're worried that anybody's going to be playing blue cards anywhere in the room, this is the thing that's going to let you get through. 4/4 on the attack for 3-cost feels more than fair. I like the stats. I like the words on the card. 2/4 on defense is maybe not as cool, but I like that it's 4 defense on a 3-cost card. You're probably going to get a swing with this, maybe 2, depending upon what your opponent's doing. And the threat of it, even, like, this is cheap enough. This could be a tech card. So this could be a card that you throw down, and now your opponent either has to remove it, or you're going to use it to remove all the shields off some guy that they've been trying to protect. I just, for as not flashy and not eye-catching and not iconic as this card is, I have nothing but positive things to say about it. I'm very excited for this kind of boring workhorse of a card, but it's going to get work done. And my prediction is this sees a lot of play.
Yeah, I definitely think it sees a lot of play, especially set 1.
All right. Moving on to the next set of cards. I'll let you do the honors on this one.
Alrighty, first up we have a 2-cost Cunning event, Asteroid Sanctuary. It's trick traded. Text reads, exhaust an enemy unit, and then you get to give a shield token to a friendly unit that costs 3 or less. What are your thoughts on this one?
This is going to be the kind of card that if your deck is going to be real swarmy, you're going to be underdropping units, you're going to be trying to have more things in play than your opponent. And by going that route, that means you're underdropping. That means the cost 3 or less threshold that you have to hit is not going to be that difficult to get to. Exhausting an enemy unit. If I have 4 guys and you only have 2 big guys and I exhaust one of them, I feel great about that exchange. 2 cost feels pretty reasonable. Maybe not the again, kind of like the workhorse card we just looked at. This is maybe not the flashiest thing, but as a 2-cost, mess with your opponent, slow them down a little bit while making one of your guys a little more sticky. If you're on a swarm the board kind of strategy on the Cunning color, I think you probably have room in your deck for something like this.
I think the ability. So, I guess was the term for this soft removal, right? Because you're not actually removing a unit, but you're essentially removing them for the turn. I feel like it's going to be very impactful in this game with the action economy we have. So I think for Leia Organa, the unit for 2 resources when played either exhausts an enemy unit or readies a resource. This event costs the same, as 1 less aspect requirement, and then exhaust an enemy unit, but instead of being able to ready a resource, you can give a shield token to a friendly unit. So I think this card's going to see a lot of play, actually. I think it has 2 decent effects that are, when you think about would you give up 5 health for a shield or 2 resources to exhaust a dude and give a dude a shield, right? I think I'd much rather play Asteroid Sanctuary than run that base. So I like this card. I think it's a good card. I think it's going to see play.
Yeah, Yeah, if I like, just for an example, you bring your Darth Vader leader into play, and I'm like, oh, now he's exhausted.
Right.
Like that's so annoying. That it could take away. This could take away 50% of somebody's turn if they only have 2 units to do anything with, and you just essentially delete the actions of 1 unit for 2 cost, and it makes a guy stickier.
Mm-hmm.
I did talk about resupply versus DJ Kyber earlier, and I think your comparison of this card to Leia works really well. I'm not making the criticism on Asteroid Sanctuary for not also giving us the body, because in a way it kind of does. If it lets a body that's already in play take a whole nother hit and survive fatal damage, it kind of like it didn't create the body, but it created that body existing for another turn or through another attack. Uh, so yeah, it's funny how it's just tiny little differences between the cards that can really swing me from being like, oh, this is going to be really good compared to this is slow and people probably won't play it. I think this one's going to be one of the good ones, though.
Yeah, I agree. Next up, we have another cunning event, 1 cost. Shoot first. It's a trick. Reads attack with a unit. It gets +1 power for this attack, and it deals its combat damage before the defender. And then in parentheses, it reads, if the defender is defeated, it deals no combat damage. So for 1 resource, you get +1 power, and you get the strike first ability. What are your thoughts? I'll let you go first.
Feels pretty good. +1 attack is not great, but I don't think you're probably running this for the attack buff. That's sometimes you'll need it, and it's nice. Bigger numbers are better than smaller numbers, of course. But the reason you run this is because it gives your guy ferocious. It gives your guy first strike. It lets me kill your dude, and you don't get to kill me back. And it only costs 1. And the art is fantastic, by the way. Like, as a longtime Star Wars fan, the idea of Han shooting first is near and dear to my heart. So this art being on this card that does this thing, it all adds up to me liking it a great deal. I will say, in constructed, is this going to make the cut necessarily? How hard up is cunning as a faction going to be for good removals? Like if there aren't cards like what was that aggression card? I think it's Open Fire that just deals 4 direct damage.
Yeah.
If cunning as a faction has direct damage cards, you maybe don't opt for this necessarily, because it's safer to do direct damage rather than to send your units into play or send your units into combat. So depending upon what the overall piece of the cunning color pie ends up looking like, I could see this being outclassed by other cards, but my guess is the existence of this card indicates that cunning is going to be relying on a lot of combat-based removal as a faction. And as far as combat-based removal goes, I think this is a very playable one.
Yeah, anything that can give your guys first strike or ferocious, I think is decent, especially when it only costs 1, right? So you start the game with 2. This is 50% of what you start with. Like you said, I agree. The attack power probably isn't relevant most of the time, but it could be very relevant at times where you have a 4 attack dude and you want to remove a 5 attack unit, right? This saves your dude from taking damage back. So I think at times it could be extremely relevant, but most of the time I don't think it will. Some interesting cards for cunning that we see here between these two for 1 and 2 costs, and then the flexibility that cunning looks like it's going to have both defensively and offensively, right? So here we see 2 cards that mess with your opponent and buff you in 2 different ways, right? So very interesting, and I like the way this is leaning for cunning, and I like both these events, and I think shoot first. I think it's slam dunk in draft and shield. You play shoot first, and then in constructed, I think you'll have a spot.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I imagine the +1 attack buff is less relevant the deeper you get into the game. Probably early game when you're dealing with like 2 and 3 cost units mostly, that +1 probably feels like it's a lot more important in those first couple of turns. And then later in the game, you care more about the first strike. Well, probably every time you play this card, you care about the first strike, actually. All right, so we'll move on here. We're looking at General Veers. This is a 3-cost ground unit, villainy affiliated. He is a 3/3 that gives other friendly Imperial units +1/+1.
I think this card's really good if he can stick around, right? If he gets wiped, then he's not very good. His ability's cool, but if you can find a way to make him stick, I guess you got to play like cell block guards and stuff. Get some Sentinel units so he can stick around, play other threatening things. But just a static +1/+1 to your units seems pretty decent.
I think they misspelled the word Sentinel on this card. Because that's what this power is going to do. If you have the Imperial units for the text on this card to matter, then your opponent is absolutely going to focus fire this guy into the dirt post haste.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes that's good enough. Sometimes you run a card, and if you actually are able to get its effect to be impactful, it just wins you the game. And a static +1/+1 on all your Imperial units, especially if you're running a lot of low-costed Imperials, like if I've got 4 or 5 guys out, I play this dude, and now all of a sudden I've got 4 or 5 more damage that I shouldn't have had. Like, games are decided by those kinds of margins. So this could be a very impactful card, but I have a hard time seeing him living unless, like in your example, you play the Sentinel first and you have other things set up that you play this guy behind to prevent your opponent to get to him. But knowing that we have direct damage cards like Open Fire, like people are going to hate this guy so hard. 3/3 for 3 is totally fair for cost and stats, and his upside could potentially go to the moon, depending upon how you build your deck around him. Probably much less effective in Constructed, but you could still take this guy in Constructed because 3/3 for 3 is not bad. And if you have a handful of Imperials, maybe you get the benefit from this guy. But even if you don't, in his worst case, you got what you paid for.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So moving on to General Dodonna. This is a 4-cost ground unit, heroism affiliated. He is a 4/4 for 4, and other friendly rebel units get +1/+1.
I think you can copy and paste everything we said about Veers. It's exactly the same.
Only this guy's slightly worse because he costs more. So he's going to be harder to weave into a turn once you have the board set up with rebels to throw this guy down and get the benefit. It's going to be not a lot harder, but slightly harder than Veers.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that sums those guys up pretty well.
Yeah.
So this slide is not actually cards. Obviously, it's just the packaging for the 2-player starter deck. So I figured we could run down here. The product is going to be one item that you get that has both starter decks, as you can see here on the screen, or as I'm describing for the audio listeners. Do you have any thoughts about them not doing individual starter decks? One way or the other, you got a feeling on that?
So I prefer 2-player starter decks. If I am looking to get into a game that I want to play with someone, it's, in my opinion, better that I don't have to buy one thing instead of multiple things. Right? That's one thing I really love about Final Fantasy TCG is how they construct their 2-player starters. And this, like, I get not the gameplay, but just some of the decisions FFG is making around their chase cards being alt arts. They want everything to be easily accessible, and their rarities for people to easily collect, base versions of cards, so you're not hunting down crazy cards. And some of the decisions they're making reminds me very much of how Final Fantasy TCG runs things, and I think that's great because I think they get a lot of things right. And one of the things they really get right is how they do their 2-player starters, and this is like, I feel almost like a copy paste and then throw Star Wars on instead of the Final Fantasy vibe. I think this is a great product. I like pretty much everything that's going on with this 2-player starter.
Just to add one more comment, they guaranteed that all of the starter exclusive cards, you get a full play set.
Mm-hmm.
So You don't have to buy multiple copies of this 2-player starter deck to have the number of copies of any card that. Now, there are some one-of cards in these, but those cards also appear in like packs and stuff. The starter exclusive cards that are in this thing, you get all that you need. You don't have to buy more than one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm underlying that so much because I'm so sick of these card companies making me buy multiple copies of the same starter just so I can get the one card that they only gave me one copy of, or
Right.
like having to buy 3 copies of a starter deck for one card. No. And that does kind of piggyback on what you were saying about the good decisions that they're making. And I think that is one of them. Yes, giving us a singleton of a powerful unit in a starter deck would incentivize certain kinds of players, I may be one of them, to buy multiple copies of that starter deck. So there is, in some way, FFG is leaving a little bit of money on the table there, but I think what they're leaving on the table in that area is going to be more than paid back with goodwill towards the game. Like, I think players are tired of being taken advantage of in these, I don't want to call it underhanded, but in these like overly aggressively monetized kinds of ways. Just when I buy a starter deck, if there's going to be cards in there that I can't get anywhere but that box, just give me the 3 that I need. That's fine. And then I'll spend the money that I don't have to spend on a second starter. I'll go buy packs. That's what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So I think it would be cool if they could have added like a booster or 2 in here, right? As like a.
True.
But my guess is they probably didn't do that. So since they're having 2 decks, right? So like I think the Lorcana starters, for example, they don't have 2-player starters. They're single starters and they have like 2 or 3 boosters in them. But this is 2 decks, so like I'm like I do a lot. I equate that to the Final Fantasy TCG, which also has 2 decks but doesn't have any boosters. So I think probably as a way to keep the cost down, they didn't throw boosters in. I think maybe if they ever do single starters, maybe that's something that would have a couple boosters. But as for me, like if I want to say like to my kid, hey, let's go pick up some decks for the Star Wars card game, I don't have to buy 2 separate products. I just buy one product with both decks in it ready to go. I like that a lot more than buying multiple
And
SKUs.
not to be like a total like nerd about it, but the fact that means there's less overall packaging, like that's good for the environment. I like the idea that there's just less junk around the cards for me to get both decks, because I was going to buy both decks anyway.
Right.
Now there's just less stuff I have to throw away.
Well, it's like it's less SKUs for them, right? Like I like the idea of a 2-player.
That's nice for people who run stores too. Like, yeah. There's so many of the decisions that they're making here that are just, I have many times on various podcasts accused various game production companies of being a little bit tone deaf to the things that like really matter to the community. Like I get that at the end of the day, FFG has to make money and they have to be able to pay the salaries of all their people in order to make these cool games that I like to play. So I'm not expecting that I should like get everything for free. Like I understand my purchase helps pay a fair wage to the people who make these things that I love. And I'm totally okay with that whole exchange. But there's companies that do that well, and there's companies that leave you as a fan feeling raw or taken advantage of or misled. And those are all bad feelings. And some of those words, maybe some people, particularly in the Star Wars Destiny community, might have some negativity to throw towards FFG for how that game was handled. But in this game, I feel like again and again, when we hit these kind of crossroads moments, like I think I was talking to you about this the other day, like, oh man, if they make me buy multiple starters, I'm going to be so annoyed. And then here they come out. You don't have to buy multiple starters. Like they're consistently making choices that are this. I've said this before on this very show. They're making the right mouth sounds. And as long as their actions back up what they're saying, I am so thrilled for where this game is heading. Like it's all the right decisions so far that we've seen.
And so far, the actions we have seen have matched up with what they've been saying. So I think that's encouraging. I think for the people, like me that were a part of the Destiny community, stuff like this has to be encouraging because Destiny had a 2-player starter. You could find it in Target. It was Rey vs. Kylo Ren. And you had to buy 2 of them to get play sets of the stuff in that box, right? So the first product that I know of that FFG made that was like a card game where you got everything you needed in one box was Marvel Champions when they had that core set release. So think about Lord of the Rings, Arkham Horror, Star Wars LCG, Game of Thrones, like all those card games they've made, those LCGs. You had to buy like 2 of everything to get full play sets. For how many years, right? So I think, they've turned the corner. It definitely seems like the company is being ran very differently than it was during Star Wars Destiny, and that can only appears to be for the better. So, so far their actions have backed up what they've been saying, and I don't see any reason to think why that would not continue.
Yeah. Well, and even with Arkham Horror, when me and my crew bought in, it was in the area where you had to buy multiples of the starter to get all the cards to be able to play with 4 people. And since then, they've completely redone how that game. I realize this isn't an Arkham Horror podcast, but they've completely redone how that game is packaged. So now you just have to buy one product. So I think they have learned that lesson.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that lesson applied in Star Wars Unlimited as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the new cards and the starter chat there. So the main topic of today's show, even though now that we're like so far in, the main topic of today's show was going to be talking about value trading. So if you're new to card games and you haven't heard these kind of terms before, there is going to be some jargon in this conversation, but I'm going to endeavor to always stop and go, hey, well, wait, what does that mean? So the first thing I wanted to find is, what is trading? So when we're playing a card game and we talk about, oh, we traded, what does that mean? Well, in the simplest of terms, it means I have a guy on the board and you have a guy on the board and our guys attacked and they traded damage. And in a lot of cases, they both died. Now, the best case scenario, what we really want is a value trade. And that's going to be when I attack your dude and your dude can't kill my dude back. So I get to kill your guy, but my guy stays alive or continues to stick to the board. And that situation right there, if you take that and understand that, you kind of understand the core of card games. Like everything else is a layer on top of a bell or whistle attached to this core concept of getting a value trade, where I get something out of my card and it sticks around longer than the something you're getting out of your card. Yeah. So the better your trade ratios, or 2 for 1 is another way to think of it. Like if it takes you 2 cards to remove my one guy, maybe I don't feel so bad that my guy got killed because you had to invest more into that. So this is the general concept of trading. So I don't know, I'll throw it to you, Banana, if you want to talk about like efficiency or if you had thoughts on trading in general.
I think for people that like are familiar with card games, obviously this isn't a new topic, but for new players, you probably think about this without even knowing you're thinking about this. Like when you're playing stuff, right? Like you said, I mean, this is a pretty simple topic, right? So you summed it up really well. The idea of value trading and using your smaller thing to take out. So there's 2 ways I look at this. So it's either I want my thing to stick around, or I want my thing that costs less to take out your thing that costs more, right? So that's also a value trade. It's just it's different because maybe my stuff's not sticking around, but you invested a lot more of your cards or resources into that thing, and then if I can take it out using less things, then we traded, but it's more of like a resource or efficiency trade versus like a board presence trade, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's something you were planning on getting.
Yeah, so a factor that you have to add into it is the units banging into each other in combat is like the simplest form of a trade.
Mm-hmm.
But you can apply this logic to every corner of a card game. So for example, I have cards in my hand. Now, card advantage is a kind of value. It's a kind of currency. By itself, it doesn't do anything. But what it does is it represents options. It represents my ability to deploy threats to the board or you have answers to deal with the threats that you've deployed to the board. And every time I play a card, I'm trading some of my card advantage currency for board advantage. Ideally, I want board advantage. But of course, you're going to try to stop me from doing that. So throughout the whole game, everything you do in a card game, you're trading resources to be able to deploy threats. You're trading resources to be able to kill your opponent's threat. And every one of these exchanges, there's going to be a ratio. So when I talk about a card being too slow, I almost feel like we should have done this before all the card reviews.
Maybe.
When I talk about a card being too slow, what I'm specifically talking about is that trade ratio. The amount of resources I have to trade to get this thing out to the board is going to put me at a disadvantage because I have to invest so much of what I have just to be able to show you that I have this thing. And then if you can, say, spend 2 resources and kill it with an open fire, well, now I spent 5 to develop something, you spent 2 to kill it. Even though it was a 1-to-1, we each spent 1 card, I invested so much more in the form of resources.
Right.
So I would encourage people, if you want to get better at card games, to think about all of these levers and dials that you put, and how everything you do when you draw a card from your deck, that develops card advantage, but that's lessening your overall stack of resources. Now, the most common way to talk about trading is just specifically in combat, but I like to kind of broaden it out and think about the whole tapestry of the rule set within a card game within the terms of trading value for value and always trying to maximize your efficiency so you're using less resources to get the best possible outcome, and you're trying to degrade your opponent's ability to act with efficiency.
I think you hit something really good there, is not just thinking about the units clashing, but thinking about everything you do in the card game, because that's really, when you start to figure that stuff out, I think that's really when you'll notice like your personal gameplay develop and start to leap. Because like everything is a resource, right? It's not just your cards or your units or your resources in your row, but even like your base health you can use as a resource. You got to think about that at times when you're looking for value. But yeah, for people new to card games, which is, this is topics generally for them, I would say just try to really be aware, I guess I'll say, of these things and what you're trading for what and where you're getting the value. And once you start to pick up on it, I think you'll really see your play improve. So, and there's also another efficiency and trade value you can think of in this game that's unique to this game versus other trading card games, and that's the action economy, right? If I can do things and less actions and you can do similar things, that's going to hugely benefit me and speed up my clock. So that's another layer to this that is unique. It's not 100% unique because there's, Star Wars Destiny has actions and Ashes has actions and side actions, so that's kind of similar. But being able to efficiently value and trade your action economy is very specific to this game. That is going to be another one of those extra layers that's going to create skill checks in Star Wars Unlimited.
I think that's a really good point that you made there, and I want to kind of build on it a little bit. The action economy is another resource, and I think there's a really tangible benefit that you can get from well managing your action resources, and that is you get to claim initiative. If you are able to accomplish your whole turn in 2 actions and it takes me 3, well, you're going to get initiative. You're going to get to go first next time. And first turn advantage is a real thing. There's a reason that going first, in Hearthstone, as an example, if you go first, the other player gets an extra card. They get an extra mana crystal, like a one-time resource. In Versus, the player who goes first is punished by not being able to have a draw in the first turn. I mean, the examples are endless. For going first, having the initiative is a valuable thing. And in this game, you get tangibly rewarded for it, not just the first turn of the game, but the first turn of every round. So if you're able to plot out your turns and do your things efficiently, like if, I mean, this can be a really crude example, but bear with me. If you have 3 cards in hand and you can use 1 card to kill a guy, or you can use a combination of the other 2 cards to kill that same guy, using the 1 card is better for hand advantage. It's better for your action economy. It's better for your future options, your tempo, because now you still have those other 2 damage spells that you have, or damage events that you haven't used yet. And you get that unit out of the way. Whereas if I tried to kill it in the 2-step process, maybe I hit it with the first piece of damage and then my opponent shields it. And now my whole turn is blown because I tried to take 2 steps to do a thing when I had the option to do 1 step. Now, again, this example is very crude. Most of the time in card games, you're not going to have such a clear-cut example of this is the correct line of play and this is the inefficient, wasteful line of play. But just because it isn't clear doesn't mean that those distinctions don't exist. And if you only want to play card games at a casual level and all of this kind of sounds like not for you, that's cool too. Like, I don't think anybody should have to think about games in this way. But if you care about getting better, if you want to improve your play, these are the kinds of concepts that you really need to kind of cram into your brain to the point where they're muscle memory. It's like learning the guitar. You're not going to sit down and be playing power chords on day 1, but once you struggle through it enough times, one day you're going to sit down and it just comes naturally. And it's the same thing with all of these card game concepts. And just to layer one more concept on there, I want to talk about incremental advantage. So it's very black and white in the action economy example, where I could take 1 turn to do a thing, or I could take 2 turns. And if I take the 1 turn, then the advantage that I get because of being more efficient is that I get to claim initiative. Now that's, again, crude. I'm almost embarrassed by how crude this example is. But it drills home the idea that if you're doing things by expending fewer resources, like if I spend 2 and you spend 3, and I spend 2 more and you spend 3 more, that incremental difference, I'm going to have those extra resources that I can spend on punching you in the face. If we're in a shootout trying to control the board, and every turn I'm investing 2 resources in the board and you're investing 3, eventually I'm going to have a surplus, and that surplus is going to be what I use to kill you and win the game, rather than just struggle for control of the board. And again, this plays out in terms of how you manage your resources, how you manage your hand, how you manage your deck, and of course, the most important place, sort of the core underlying concept that started this entire discussion, how you manage the actual combat on the board. And that is, in my opinion, trading and understanding the concept of a value trade. If you can get that one skill down, that information, that knowledge in your head is kind of portable to all the different concepts in the trading card constellation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you notice from like good card game players that figure that out. It doesn't matter what game they're playing, they're generally good at it, right? So, and that comes from being able to identify when you sit down at a game what your resources are and where to gain those values, right? So, I know somebody that was on the Versus System Pro Tour that was one of the best Star Wars Destiny players in the world, and he's learned these skills through playing card games for 20 plus years that you get to, right, you can apply these same principles to any game, really, even board games or miniatures games, war games. These concepts still apply there, in any competitive game environment, I think. And I do think I want to ask you this: is do you think people that have played like Star Wars Destiny or Ashes, where they have these similar action economies, will have somewhat of an advantage in the early tournament scene because they're used to having that action economy and valuing and evaluating your action economy versus like someone that's coming from like Pokemon or another random TCG?
Oh, definitely. I mean, will it be a tangible enough advantage that we're going to like see it in tournament results across multiple events? That I'm not so sure about. But I think any player, like if you're a good Pokemon player, you're going to be able to wrap your head around the concepts to become a good Star Wars Unlimited player. Like they're similar enough. But if an experienced, say, Ashes player sits down and tries to learn Star Wars Unlimited, they might learn it faster than somebody who has like a Versus and Magic background like I do. I almost certainly. I'm a big believer in the portability of knowledge. I think the idea that learning something in one domain or on a particular project, there's always going to be lessons and skills that you can take from that and take elsewhere. And and sometimes the transferring of knowledge is a skill in and of itself. Not everybody's super good at taking disparate threads and kind of tying them together. But if you're a skilled card player that has dealt in an action economy before, I think you're going to pick up Star Wars Unlimited much faster than somebody who's never dealt with an action economy before. It's certainly something I've kind of fumbled and made some misplays. And again, we don't have all the cards, so it's sort of a weird test environment to be playing in anyway. But every element. So I'm getting a little far afield from the topic, but I like to think about card games as almost like Frankenstein. I think of them as like a collection of mechanics. So, do I get to have attacker initiative? Do I get to draw 2 cards a turn? Like all of these things kind of are in the matrix of like options of what a card game could be in my head. So, I'm really familiar with a lot of these concepts that have come from these other games. So, it's going to make it easier for me to kind of plug that existing knowledge base into Star Wars Unlimited, with the exception of sometimes existing knowledge can screw you up. An example that comes up all the time when teaching card games is people say something like, oh, well, that guy, if that unit's exhausted, they can't hit me back, right? When I attack them. I've never played the game where that is the rule, but I've encountered it enough that I know it's a popular game. I think actually this came up on the show, and Kennedy said it was Ashes, maybe, was the game where an exhausted unit can't strike back. So you got to be careful about those kinds of things. Sometimes pre-existing knowledge can get in the way of you hearing how the game actually is. You start to hear what you think it should be. But generally speaking, I am a huge believer in the more you know, the better you are at learning whatever the next skill is. And that certainly applies in card games. That was a very lengthy answer to your question.
Yeah, it's fine.
So I think overall, that kind of sums up the ideas that I had as far as trading. I know Kennedy had some thoughts on this too, but apparently he's not going to be able to make it tonight. So we'll have to revisit this topic with him because I know he wanted to talk about it as well. But that more or less brings the main topic to a close, unless you had some further things you wanted to add, Banana.
No, I mean, it's a pretty basic topic, but there is layers to it, and you can get deep with it. But I think as like a general new player overview, like, hey, these are some things to think about while you're going through this. I think we covered a lot. I think just really thinking about action economy and proper sequencing for getting things done in Star Wars Unlimited is going to be and another thing to think about is what you play in your resource row, right? Like that is a whole nother layer to this whole thing, right? There's like 4 or 5, I mean, probably more really interesting spots in this game where it's gonna create skill gaps, right? And it starts with what you play in your resource row. And I think one thing, this is kind of going off topic, but one thing I think that is going to trap a lot of new players in Star Wars Unlimited is they're going to draw their hand, or you're going to be like, oh, well, this costs 6. Let me put it in my resource row. And this costs 7. Let me put it in my resource row. And then when you get to that round and you're drawing, oh, it'd be nice if I had that card to put in my resource row, right? Like, so I think that's a trap you're going to have to think about. Don't just think about your first turn or your second turn. You got to think about, okay, how many of this do I have in my deck? How many do I have? How many cards? Like, you can expect how often you're going to see it. You're going to kind of learn your deck and figure out, am I okay to resources now? Am I going to be able to, figure out if I can see this again or not? Because there's going to be times where, man, should I resource this 8-drop Palpatine, right? Do I need this to win this game? if I get to turn 8 and I need this to win this game, I'm going to be really hating myself for putting this in the resource row, right? So there's just some things to think about on top of value trading is managing your resource row. So yeah, kind of went off topic,
Yeah,
but just another layer to think about. There's a
that
lot
could almost
going
be
on
a whole
here.
show.
Yeah, there's a lot going on
Coming
here.
from Versus,
Yeah,
I'm very used to the how many copies of this card are in my deck? Can I afford to put this in the row? Do I have to take this 8 drop now and just let it rot in my hand for 8 turns?
Right.
Like, how important is it?
At least with Versus,
that is a whole
right?
other area that we could go deep on.
At least with Versus, you have where you have the ability to play locations though as well. You're not always putting units into play as resources, so there is a little more flexibility there. But like if you're not seeing your resources, right, like you're really like, man, I can't play superpowers. Like I'm not going to be able to play these plot twists. Like if you're not hitting your locations, you're sucking, right? So, but you can at least play units. You're not locked out of completely playing the game. But yeah, I think that's something that Versus system players and Dragon Ball Super players to an extent will have an easy time managing, or an easier time managing because they've been doing it already. But yes, that's another thing.
This does kind of remind me of one of my favorite quotes that I heard from the professional Hearthstone player Firebat, who's playing a discard deck back in the day, and discard in Hearthstone is all random. You don't get to control what's ripped out of your hand. And the comment was something like, well, yeah, of course I don't like discard. They're all good cards. I don't put bad cards in my deck. Like, so every time I discard a card, I'm discarding a good card.
Right.
And you have to kind of think about it. And it's the same thing with your resource row, or it's going to be the same thing with your resource row in Star Wars Unlimited. You're never going to put a card in your row that's a bad card because you don't put bad cards in your deck. Right. So you kind of just have to wrap your head around the idea of like, oh, I wanted this card. I needed this card. And I'm also going to ship it to the row and I'm never going to see it again. And that can be a really tough thing to kind of work through mentally as a player, because I think we're probably all a little bit greedy. We probably all want all the good cards in our hand at any given time so we can play them. And this idea of, oh, I drew a good card, but now I have to take it and can't actually use it. It has to be a resource. There will be a skill gap there for sure.
Another thing I think that this plays off of that, but it's slightly different, is while deck building. I think another trap people can fall into is they're going to be like, wow, this card's not that good in this matchup, but it's really good in this matchup. And I'm going to put it in my deck because if I see the bad matchup, I can just play it in my resource row. Just don't play it in your deck. If it's only good some of the time, right? Just don't play it. Play something that's good all the time, because there's going to be enough cards that you can figure that out. Or if we ever get to, if there's side decks in this game, if it's a card that you would side deck, it's probably not good enough to be in your main deck. You know what I'm saying? Like there's going to be that trap for new players, I think, when deck building too, since you have the option to play cards in your resource row. They're going to play some niche tech cards because they have the option to play it in the resource row, and then you never draw that card anyway. So then you're playing other stuff with your resources, and then you finally draw that card, and it's a dead card because, well, I don't need to put it in my resource row because I have enough already to put it. Like, you're gonna fall into this trap. Just don't do it, right? If it's only good some of the time, keep it in your binder.
So I think another really core concept for new players, or even established players, because it's something I need reminded of from time to time. You have to know what your deck does first. Don't pack in the hate cards. Don't pack in the disruption. I mean, unless you're making a disruption specific deck, but generally speaking, whatever your strategy is, build that first and build the best version of that you can build. And then if there's space left over in the deck, then you can fit in those tech cards. But I would even argue, unless you're building for a specific tournament and you have a known meta and you have a Swiss room that you're going to walk into where you can make relatively accurate predictions about the other things that you're going to see in that room, I think a lot of those hate cards are absolute traps. Like if you're just going to your locals to have fun with your buddies, don't pack stasis in your old school Magic players are going to know what I'm talking about. Don't pack that. Just make your deck the best version of what it can do. And then when you go to a major tournament and you're trying to win some money, that's when you need to start thinking about slotting in those tech cards and what are my flexible slots where I can make some room for my core strategy to fit in these things that protect me against something I'm weak against or can target a thing that's in the room. But like 80-90% of the time when you're building a deck, throw all that out and just focus on what am I trying to do? How do I do what I want to do best? And you're going to have way more fun playing that way. The majority of games, if you aren't trying to make your deck designed to hate everybody else in the room, everybody else in the room is going to have more fun with you. But also you're probably going to have more fun because your deck isn't dependent on the other person walking into your fist for you to be able to throw punches. Your deck is throwing punches, and that's just, being proactive is just generally more fun. Unless you're a control player, I guess.
This makes me wanna. We need to write this down. Topic for a future show on community building. So what you just said made me think of that, and how like you have to know your local scene. If you just play the best deck every week, you're probably not going to have a local scene for very long, right? Unless your local scene is all competitive players, don't play the best deck all the time, right? Play fun decks, do sealed leagues, do fun stuff to build the local casual community, because that's what's going to make your community thrive. So I think we got an episode when we get closer, probably game release. That's probably a good one to do on how to build and maintain a thriving local community. I think that'd be a good episode to do.
I would also argue that makes you better as a player. If the only thing you do is you always play the best thing, there's probably like 80-85% of the card pool that you're never going to touch.
Right.
So if you use your locals as a place to give yourself permission to play the weird, janky Max Rebo deck, fingers crossed, you're going to see more cards. And then if somebody tries to throw you a curveball in a cash money, high stakes situation, you're going to know what you're not going to have to go, hey, let me read that card, because you've taken the time to dive deeper into the card pool. And really, I think that's probably what locals should be for. But you're right. This is starting. We're way afield from the original topic.
Yeah. You think we hit some listener questions quick and then we wrap this up?
That sounds great to me, man.
All right. So I'll start. We had a couple on Twitter. I'll get Twitter loaded up here. So first one is from Jedi Geek Girl. Asked, with Boba Fett being confirmed as a leader, how would you design his father, Django, as a leader? So I'll let you answer this first. So how would you design Django?
So probably got to put him in the cunning faction. Maybe you could get away with putting him in vigilance, because I feel like he's a warrior. His head's on a swivel. But most of what we've seen vigilance so far has felt a little more heroic. So I'm more inclined to lean him towards the cunning aspect. I would like to see some sort of bounty mechanic. So Boba has when an enemy card gets removed from play, he gets a benefit. I kind of like that flavor, but I would like for Django to like call his shot in some kind of way. Like maybe his undeployed side is you pay a resource, or maybe you just exhaust him and pick an enemy unit, and if that unit gets KO'd this turn, get something. I don't know.
Like mark
maybe
a
not
target.
An extra resource, because Boba sort of already did that, but like maybe you get to put a shield on somebody, or maybe an experience token. That's probably a little more thematic. He kills a dude and then he gets a little stronger because he gets an experience token. I think something like that is where I would put Django.
Yeah, I think I like that. I think. What about if you think like, you mark a target, right? Like you said, but he gains like raid 2 and saboteur when he attacking that unit, so he could remove shields and then he has an ability. That's a static ability that says when Mace Windu is deployed in this arena, defeat Django, right? Like, because I gotta tell you,
you have to tear the card. You have to find where his neckline is on the card and tear right there.
Because this party's
like chaos
over.
Confetti. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was from Jedi Geek Girl. Lost Twitter. Okay. Another question from the Fab Enthusiast, who's currently playing Viscera and Katsu, wants to know. He said there's been some chatter online through content creators about potential prize pools for competitive circuits for SWU. FFG aren't really known for big cash prizes, and I don't think that will change here. What do we think is a realistic goal here with prizes at events? So if I know FFG, there's going to be playmats, there's going to be tokens, and you're going to like this. So the last Gen Con they had was at 2019, was the North American Championships, and the winner got a wooden dice trophy. So it was like a 4x4 block of wood shaved to look like a Destiny dice.
That's kind of a cool trophy. So I came from Magic and the original Versus system, which had very high cash prizes. I think the first Pro Tour for Versus was $1 million purse. So coming into Versus 2PCG, it was in the first couple of years, they did like 10Ks, and then 10Ks became 5Ks. And now they've done some events that are like 2.5Ks. And at no point did those smaller prize pools really diminish. Like, I'm not playing card games to make money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I can win some money, I'm not going to walk away from it. But if the game I don't know enough about FFG's competitive scene in Destiny, but just based on what you said there, it sounds like big cash prizes are unrealistic. Which means probably if you're looking to play cards to make money, SWU might not be the game for you. But prior to you saying all that, what I thought in my head is like, well, kind of the Versus model of like 2.5, 5Ks, those kinds of things for big tournaments. That seems not I mean, I realize that's not big money,
right?
But it's enough to get people excited, but not a crazy amount that would like break the bank. So I could see something like that being realistic in a vacuum. But if you know more about how FFG has run organized play in the past, maybe even that is outside of their wheelhouse. I have to plead ignorance on that one, I'm afraid.
Well, I know it's like, so before Keyforge, before they like broke the algorithm or whatever, they had plans for cash prize events, and then they just never happened. So there was a plan at one point for FFG to have cash prize events for Keyforge, but so I don't know if that means cash prizes are on the table for Star Wars Unlimited. If there are, I wouldn't expect to be very big. I think you're probably closer with your Versus system analogy of like a 5, 2.5, 3K prize pool is probably more realistic. But I think you can definitely expect playmats and alternate art versions of cards. They did some cool things with, they called them spot glosses. They were kind of like a clear acrylic plastic card that they did for like character cards. So you couldn't do it for cards that went into your deck, but like you could do them for leaders or bases or things like that. That would be cool that I could see them doing. All right.
And honestly, playmats, deck boxes, tokens, acrylic cards, I'm all about all that stuff. I love all that stuff. So saying, oh, they might not do a huge cash money tournament. Sure, cash gets people excited, like, and I want to have a competitive scene, but I think there's enough people who are willing to play for playmats that will still have a competitive scene if there isn't some kind of major cash pro tour.
I mean, Destiny didn't have cash prizes, and that had a pretty, it had a decent competitive scene. So, move on to some Discord questions. Rebel Trader, how many Vaders does it take to shuffle a galaxy? And the answer is 8. The only correct answer is 8. So we'll just move on. Thanks for the meme. This is from P. It just says P. I know that's not the name, but it just says P. Okay. What card do you think is the most thematic card revealed so far? I'll let you go first.
I mean, it has to be Shoot First, right?
If that's what you think.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Shoot First.
Okay. I'm going to go with I Am Your Father.
It sounds like you think something different.
I Am Your Father.
Oh, that's a good one, too.
Right. The ability to actually, like, yell no. And, like, FFG said on stream, like, at Gen Con, during the demos, you'd hear people like yell like "No!" Like
That's impossible.
Yeah, sounds pretty good.
So, just as a sidebar, I get that not everybody likes silly. Like silly can be annoying. And
Star Wars is
arguably
silly, so
forcing a card player to have to say a specific word as a game mechanic is silly. I am here for it. I love the silly.
I mean, Star Wars is silly, right? I mean,
A little bit, yeah.
so
I mean, we are grown men talking about like essentially a soap opera for 8-year-olds.
right. Move on. Next one we have Faith. Which options do you think will be on command, aggression, and cunning? The hypothetical double aspect cards like vigilance.
Oh, so how many options were on the vigilance one? There were 3, right? Or was it 4?
I think it was,
Okay. Oh man. Well, for aggression, just straight up kill a dude almost has to be one of them. Although I guess what cost it? Man, this is going to be so hard. Okay, let me approach it from this direction. Rather than say specifically what the powers should be, let me kind of lay out a tapestry of it. Because the way I look at the double vigilance card is it's doing a bunch of different things that all fit within the wheelhouse of the vigilance slice of the color pie. So if I wanted to make a similar card for aggression, the way I would approach it as a designer would be to say, what is the essence of the red faction in this game? So I think a mode that lets you pick a unit and have it attack with some kind of an attack buff, or maybe
like
kind of like shoot first. If it
keyword or
kills
something.
the unit, it doesn't get hit back, something like that. Maybe a mode that lets you ready a unit. Maybe a mode that lets you straight up kill a guy. So that's kind of like where I would see aggression coming from. Do you want to take one?
Sure, I think from what we've seen with command, maybe like you take the top card of your deck and put it into play as a resource, right? Since we've seen 2 command cards that ramp. So I think some sort of option that ramps. I think probably something that gives something experience tokens seems very in theme for command. First, I don't know if we've actually seen command cards that give experience tokens, but I just feel like that the vibe of just the word command and what I think of like Tarkin like sitting back and running things like buffing dudes, right? So I think maybe that I don't know what else would be the other 2 options, but something along those lines of like buffing dudes or ramping would be 2 of them.
Scry, maybe. Or,
Oh yeah,
not to use the magic term, but the like flip top 5 cards of your deck, pick a command unit out of it or an Imperial unit or something like that to feed your hand, or maybe flip the top 3 and put a command unit into play, something like that.
Well, that kind of fits with Tarkin, right? Because he searches like the top 5 and looks for 2 Imperial cards. So yeah, maybe something that you look at the top, whatever, and find a command card. That could definitely be one of them.
And cunning, I think some kind of mode where you disrupt your opponent, either by exhausting their units or their resources, maybe putting a resource back into hand, something.
Ooh,
that's probably too strong.
That's definitely spicy.
Some sort of disruptive element, maybe even a whole card of disruptive elements. Like the modes could be exhaust 2 units, exhaust a resource, bounce a guy. Although why you would ever exhaust a guy instead of like.
Well, you could exhaust one guy and bounce the other guy, right? You could bounce one guy and exhaust another guy.
Yeah. So I would think that the cunning one would have a whole suite of disruption options. That's where I put that color.
Citizen Keen, who runs SWDB, shout out, asks, what are the second order effects of Draw 2? How does it force us to reevaluate tempo effects like bounce, etc.? So I'm guessing, what are the secondary effects of drawing 2?
So
and how it affects tempo.
It's hard for me to put myself in the headspace of somebody who hasn't kind of internalized the concept of Draw 2. The original Versus system was Draw 2. I started playing that in the early 2000s. The new Versus system, which is probably the card game I've played the most over the last 5 years or so, is Draw 2. So a lot of the differences between draw 1 and draw 2, at least for me personally, come down to I get really annoyed when I only get to draw 1 card a turn in a game. I do think it is correct to be thinking about those second order consequences in terms of how quickly you're going to exhaust your deck. Right now in Lorcana, there's a phenomena where I can't remember the aspects, but there's a specific type of control deck that you, instead of running 60, you run like 77, 75 cards, because in the mirror match, you always lose to getting milled out if you don't have enough cards in your deck. So this is kind of a loose example, but that kind of thing is going to matter. We are going to eat through our decks faster, and that's going to mean that draw effects, you look at a card in Magic that says draw a card and its value might be here, whereas a similar card in Swoop might be here because we draw so many more cards. So I do think there's going to be a lot of places where things aren't going to feel the same way they do coming from Magic or Pokemon. But it's a little hard for me to go into my head and kind of parse those specifically because I'm so ingrained as a draw 2 per turn player. That's kind of my home. So I don't know that I'm the best person to be able to rattle off all of those differences without giving it a little more thought.
Yeah, that's fair. Next one's from University of Radlands Pierce. Shout out. Contributor on the Build Phase server. Wants to know what other product lines or SKUs get released alongside the starter pack and booster boxes, any collector troves, etc. So what do you think gets released with?
I mean, I assume he's not talking about like playmat sleeves, upgraded tokens.
I don't think so because we already know that stuff's coming from GameGenic. So.
Yeah. So I imagine he's looking at like an Illumineers Lorcana's on the mind because it's the hotness right now. So I apologize to anybody who's sick of hearing about Lorcana, but I imagine he's trying to think of something like the Illumineers trove. I'm not into those kinds of products, honestly. Like starter decks, booster packs, and then things to supplement my gameplay experience like mats and sleeves. Like that's kind of where I'm at. The idea of buying a specific box that has like maybe a handful of booster packs or like an exclusive card that you can only get in this box, I'm not super thrilled with those kind of products. I would much rather buy a box where I get all the packs. I know kind of what the rarity distribution is on those, like getting kind of like loose, like 3 to 5 packs in a box with like an oversized card or something. I mean, maybe FFG does it.
I don't think so.
Because there's probably money to be made there, but I sort of hope they don't.
I don't think so. I think it'll just be the booster boxes and the starter decks because we already know GameGenic is going to have tokens and sleeves and boxes and playmats. So I think that's the stuff. But I don't think FFG will have any other FFG SKUs for Star Wars Unlimited other than the starter and the booster box, at least for now. I could see maybe
if there's like a big Star Wars movie that releases, they come out with like a movie box that has like some movie specific cards in it with a few packs or like a couple of decks or something to kind of cash in on people who are like hype about whatever the new movie is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, but generally speaking, I don't want to see collector boxes and that kind of stuff. I stepped on you a little bit there, though, man. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
That's good. I agree with all that. What I was going to say is I could see maybe like years down the road, maybe they do like kind of like what FFTCG does, like with the anniversary box, where you get a bunch of like older legendaries and rares and stuff reprints with new artwork, and like that's cool. That's a cool thing. That's not that expensive. It gives you older cards that are still relevant and with new artwork, and like that's I don't mind that. That's like a once a year thing. But like when like Dragon Ball Super was doing like gift packs and anniversary boxes, and they had draft boxes where you had to draft out of this box, right? It was all these packs. You didn't draft with the regular booster sets, you drafted with the packs in this box. And then they had the starter decks, then they had like expert starter decks, which were supposed to be more, they were starter decks, but they were for more advanced players. And then they had like these other packs that were like what you said, it was like 3 to 5 boosters, and it had like a promo card on it that you could only get in that box. Like, I'm not into the Bandai. The Bandai model is I think the Final Fantasy TCG is a really good distribution model as far as a trading card game goes, I think. And it seems like Star Wars Unlimited is kind of copying that model. So, like a similar skew, right? Low skews, but
Yeah.
good quality card
Too many
game
products.
mechanics.
Just it starts to feel overwhelming and confusing
Mhm.
for newer players who maybe aren't familiar with the TCG space. And I feel like we're very likely to get some of that type of person given the IP this game is going to be based on. Let's not confuse these people in a blizzard like
Mhm.
like a blizzard of products. I mean, sell them their starter decks, and
Let them get
then they
booster
can buy
boxes.
packs.
Yep.
And if they want them, yeah, like that's what we need.
Yep.
I want that cut and dry. Let's get the game off the ground. And if a few years from now they want to do a holiday pack or a collector box or whatever, okay, fine. But let's not machine gun 10 different SKUs and then expect local stores to be able to carry all that product and have them on the Nah, let's keep it simple. Let's build the foundation. At least that's what I would like to see. And if somebody else is really into those collector's boxes, like,
Well,
God bless. I'm not trying to yuck your yum, but
I guess go
speaking for me.
Go try Lorcana, I guess. Another
Yeah.
thing that I would eventually like to see is like something that Versus System has added. And so it's Final Fantasy is like that boss deck, that boss battle type mechanic, right? So whether that's like how Final Fantasy does it, right? It's like its own deck. That could be cool. Or even the way Versus does it, where it's just cards that make the other stuff that you already have stronger. Either way, I think that would be a cool thing eventually to do like a one versus many, right? So you could have like a big boss Vader versus like a Lucan and Chewie. That could be cool. So maybe
Could not
eventually, a
agree
couple
more.
years
I
down.
love one versus many.
So I mean, I don't need that right away, but I think that stuff like that's good for the game, that you use the mechanics and the good system you have, and you sprinkle in these other flares to get use out of like cards you normally wouldn't play, or just get more use out of your cards other than the normal 1v1. I think is good. Like Fab just added a PvE mode, like that's wild, right? Ash has added a PvE mode that works really well. So eventually down the line, I could see one-off things like that. But first couple sets, I think we're just going to see starters and boosters, or maybe just boosters for some sets. We don't know if every set's going to have a starter, but I think a good idea would be to have starters for every set. That way, it gives brand new players to the game a good jumping on point with that set to try the game out before they decide if they want to invest in booster boxes and stuff. But
yeah, and with only 4 sets a year, a couple of starter decks with each set, I think is pretty reasonable and would not create that like blizzard of SKUs like I was talking about before.
So last thing real quick before you wrap this up, we're having a giveaway. GenCon promos, I have them here, so you can see the glare of the Luke and Vader. Get my full arts.
And those are gorgeous promo cards.
So you can see they have the event tag stamp on them. So community member that demoed the game 17 times while he was at Gen Con gave us 2 sets to give out. So we're going to give out 1 set here shortly, and then we'll give another set out closer to release. So to enter this giveaway, like this video on YouTube for the podcast, comment on this YouTube video, and let us know what you think the most thematic card is that you've seen in Star Wars Unlimited. So everybody that likes the video, subscribes to our YouTube, and comments what they think the most thematic card we've seen is so far will be entered in the giveaway. We'll do one of those online roulette wheels, put everybody's name on it, spin it. We'll do it on stream the next time we record. We'll record it and we'll do it live and announce the giveaway winner at that time. So we'll probably do like a week where we'll have those open. So this is going to go out on the 25th of August. So we'll do whatever a week is, we'll keep that open and all those names will be entered in. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this podcast episode on YouTube, and comment what you think the most thematic card you've seen in Star Wars Unlimited is so far. And that'll enter you in giveaway for the Gen Con promos. Cool.
Exciting stuff, man.
I'll let you wrap this one up.
All right, so I think that brings us to the end of another kind of marathon episode here. I appreciate you flying with me, Banana.
Yep.
So until next time, we will see you in the arenas.